The morning my husband handed me a coffee mug and said, "I made it just how you like it," I smiled and said thank you. I didn't know that was the beginning of the end. I didn't know it was the beginning of something worse than that. His name was Cord, short for Cordell, which he hated, so nobody called him that except his grandmother. We met at a mutual friend's backyard cookout in Raleigh the summer I was 26. He was tall, easy to laugh, the kind of person who remembers your drink order the second time you meet. I thought that meant he paid attention. I thought that meant he cared. We got married 2 years later in October. Small ceremony, my mom's backyard, 40 people. String lights in the trees. I wore my grandmother's earrings. My best friend. I'd known her since 3rd grade. I'll call her my best friend because that's what she was. She fixed my veil 3 times because I kept moving around. She told me I was the happiest she'd ever seen me. I believed her. I was. I want to be clear about who I was before all of this, because I think it matters. I was not someone who fell apart easily. I had my associate's degree, then finished my bachelor's while working full-time at a dental office as a front desk coordinator. I was the person in my friend group who showed up with a casserole when someone's parent died. I handled things. I was fine in a crisis. That's important to understand, because of what happened later, because of what people said about me later. The first symptom I remember noticing was my hands. It was a Tuesday in February, about 14 months into our marriage. I was filing insurance claims at my desk, and I kept dropping my pen. Not once, 4 times in 20 minutes. I thought I was tired. I'd been sleeping badly, which I also brushed off, because I'd always been a light sleeper. I made a note of it, the way you make a note of something you don't really think is a noteworthy thing. By April, it was different. My hands weren't just clumsy. They were numb sometimes, in a way that moved up to my elbows by the end of the workday. I had headaches that felt like pressure behind my eyes rather than the kind of headache you get from a screen. And I was exhausted in a way I couldn't explain. Not tired. Exhausted. Like my body was running a program in the background that I didn't have access to. I told Cord about it one night while we were cleaning up after dinner. He was rinsing dishes and I was telling him about my hands, and he said, and I remember this exactly, "You're probably just dehydrated. You never drink enough water." He handed me a glass. I drank it. I told myself he was probably right. My mom noticed before anyone else did. She came over for my birthday in May, and she looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "You look pale. Are you eating?" I told her I was fine. She asked me if I was happy. I said yes, of course. She held my hand for a second and didn't say anything else. I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought she was just being a mom. I went to my primary care doctor in June. I told her about the numbness, the fatigue, the headaches. She ran blood work, checked my thyroid, asked me if I was under stress. I told her about the symptoms, but I minimized them the way you do when you're sitting in a paper gown and feeling slightly embarrassed for being there. She said my labs looked okay. She suggested I look into whether I was grinding my teeth at night. Maybe a night guard would help the headaches. She said to come back if things got worse. Things got worse. By August, I was having trouble walking straight lines. Not stumbling, not falling. Just this subtle drift, like my left side and my right side weren't communicating perfectly. I noticed it first when I was walking through the parking lot at work, and I kept veering slightly left. I thought maybe I was favoring one side because my back hurt. My back did hurt. Everything hurt, actually, in a low-level way that was hard to describe to anyone because it didn't sound like much when I said it out loud. Cord had started making me tea every evening around this time. Chamomile, he said, was good for sleep. He'd read something about it. He made it in the blue ceramic mug I liked, with just a little honey, exactly how I'd make it for myself. It felt like a kind thing. I was grateful. I want to say that clearly. I was genuinely grateful. I told my best friend that Cord was being so thoughtful, that he was worried about me, that he was taking care of me. She said that was sweet. We both thought it was sweet. I went back to my doctor in September. Different complaints, same conversation. This time she referred me to a neurologist. The earliest appointment was 6 weeks out. I took it. 6 weeks felt like a long time, but I was managing. I was still going to work every day. I was still making dinner, doing laundry, being a functioning person. I kept telling myself it wasn't that bad. Cord's behavior had started to shift in ways I noticed but didn't name. He wasn't unkind exactly, but he started saying things like, "You're always in your head, and I think you make yourself feel worse by focusing on it." He said his mom thought I might have anxiety. His mom, I'll call her his mother because I can't bring myself to use something warmer, had never particularly liked me. She thought I was too independent, which she said like it was a character flaw. When I lost weight, without trying that fall, about 11 pounds between July and October, she told me at Sunday dinner that I looked fragile. She said it like a judgment. Cord laughed it off. I said I wasn't fragile. Nobody seemed to hear me. I started keeping a journal in October. Not because I'm a journal person. I'm not, but because I was starting to have trouble remembering things and I wanted a record. I'd forget what I'd eaten for breakfast by noon. I'd start a sentence and lose the end of it. I wrote down my symptoms every day with timestamps. I don't know exactly why I did that. Some part of me I wasn't fully listening to must have known I'd need it later. The neurologist appointment was in mid-November. She was thorough. She watched me walk. She did reflex tests. She ordered an MRI and a specific panel of blood work I hadn't had done before. She didn't say what she was looking for. She said she'd be in touch. 2 days before the MRI, Cord and I had a fight. The first real fight we'd had since the symptoms started. I'd found the electric bill and the gas bill both past due. We were supposed to be on autopay, and I'd assumed everything was fine. I asked him about it and he got defensive fast, said he'd been dealing with a lot at work, said I was making him feel like a failure over 2 bills. I said I wasn't. I just wanted to understand what was happening with our finances. He said I was always keeping score. The conversation ended with him going to bed and me sitting at the kitchen table alone, going through our checking account on my laptop. What I found there, that took me longer to process than it should have. Our joint checking was lower than I'd expected by about $4,000 over 3 months. There were transfers I didn't recognize. Small ones, $30 here, $80 there. Nothing that would trip an alarm on its own. I told myself there were probably explanations. Subscriptions I've forgotten. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I did not sleep. The MRI came back with a note from the neurologist's office asking me to come in to discuss results. That is the sentence that nobody wants to receive. I called Cord from the parking lot of my office and I was crying before I finished telling him what the voicemail said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Let's not assume the worst." He came to the appointment with me. The neurologist sat across from us in her office and she said the MRI showed some abnormalities she wanted to discuss. She also said my blood work had flagged something that she wanted to refer to a specialist. She mentioned the words heavy metal panel, and I didn't fully understand what that meant in the moment. She was calm and careful with her words. She said she wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything. Cord asked a few questions. I sat there trying to absorb what absorbing it was going to mean. On the drive home, Cord was quiet in a way that felt strange, not worried quiet, something else. I asked him what he was thinking. He said, "I just hope this isn't going to become a whole thing." I turned to look at him and he was watching the road. I didn't say anything. I filed that away somewhere behind my sternum and left it there. My best friend came over that Friday and I told her everything. Spread across 2 hours and a bottle of wine we barely touched. She sat on my couch with her knees pulled up and her expression went through about 8 different things while I talked. When I finished, she said, "Has it occurred to you that something is actually wrong? Like, actually wrong, not in your head?" I said I was starting to think that. She said I should call my mom. I did that night. My mom drove up from Wilmington the following weekend. She went through my journal with me page by page, reading my timestamps out loud. She didn't say I was overreacting. She didn't ask me if I was under stress. She asked me if Cord had always made my tea. I said he'd started in the summer. She asked what kind. I said chamomile. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she asked if she could take the blue mug with her when she left. I told her that was a strange request. She said, "Probably, but let me take it anyway." I let her take it. The specialist appointment was 3 weeks later. A toxicologist, which was a word I had to look up because I wasn't sure I was hearing it right. My mom came with me. Cord said he had a work thing he couldn't move, which was the first time in 6 months he hadn't come to a medical appointment. The toxicologist reviewed my blood work, asked me detailed questions about my daily routines, what I ate, what I drank, whether I took any supplements. She was thorough in a way that felt different from thorough. It felt like she was building something, assembling a picture one piece at a time. At the end of the appointment, she said that my levels of a specific compound were elevated in a way that wasn't consistent with environmental exposure. She said she'd like to do further testing. She said it in the careful, neutral way that medical professionals say things when they already know the answer and they're waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. I asked her point blank what she thought was happening. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I think someone may be contributing to your exposure intentionally. I need you to understand that this is not a diagnosis. It's a concern. And I need you to tell me if you have any reason to believe someone in your life might be causing you harm." I didn't answer right away. My mom reached over and took my hand. I told the toxicologist about the tea. She asked about the mug. I told her my mom had it. My mom looked at me and then she took her phone out and showed the toxicologist a photo she'd taken of the mug's interior. There was a residue along the rim, a discoloration that I had noticed before and assumed was mineral buildup from hard water. The toxicologist asked if she could arrange for it to be tested. My mom said she'd already sent it to a lab. She'd done that the morning after she took it home. She'd looked things up. She hadn't told me because she wasn't sure yet and she didn't want to scare me. My mom had figured it out before anyone said the words out loud. That's who my mother is. The lab results on the mug came back before the toxicologist's follow-up appointment. I got a call from my mom first. She wasn't crying, but her voice had that particular quality it gets when she is working very hard not to cry. She told me the results had found traces of a heavy metal compound consistent with what was showing up in my blood work. She told me she had already called a lawyer. She told me to come to Wilmington. I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, but the truth is, I felt almost nothing immediately. It was like a circuit breaker flipped. I was standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Cord had handed me that blue mug every single night for 6 months, and I felt the air go out of the room and then come back different. I went very still. And then, slowly, I started to understand. He had not been taking care of me. He had been making me sick. The lawyer my mom had already found was a woman named, I'll just say she was exceptional. She had a corner office and a bookshelf that took up an entire wall, and she looked at me across her desk like she had seen things like this before, which it turned out she had. She walked me through what we were looking at, legally and practically. She talked about the financial irregularities in our joint account. She had me bring 3 months of statements. She explained what documentation we needed. She was calm in a way that made me calmer, which I needed, because underneath the numbness, I was terrified. What we found in the accounts, once someone who knew what to look for was looking, Cord had been moving money into a secondary account I hadn't known existed. Not large amounts, never large enough to trigger automatic alerts. Over 14 months, it totaled just over $23,000. My money. I made $54,000 a year as an office coordinator. I had been contributing more to our household expenses than he had for most of our marriage, a fact he'd explained away various times with various explanations that I had accepted because I trusted him, because I loved him, because I thought that's what you did. I left on a Thursday. I didn't tell him I was going. My mom drove up and we packed what I needed in 3 hours while he was at work. My best friend came to help. Nobody said much. We were efficient and quiet. I took my journals. I took my grandmother's earrings. I took a photograph of my mom and me from my college graduation that had sat on the bookshelf in our living room for 5 years. I did not say goodbye. I did not leave a note. My lawyer filed within the week. The documentation from the toxicologist, the lab results from the mug, the financial records. It moved faster than I expected. Partly because the evidence was specific and partly because my lawyer was exactly who she needed to be. A detective was assigned. Cord was interviewed. His responses, I was told later, were not helpful to him. I was staying at my mom's house in Wilmington while all of this happened. I slept in my old room, which she'd turned into a guest room with a gray duvet and a small succulent on the windowsill. I slept 12 hours the first night, then 10, then 8. I started eating again. Actually eating, not the forced, mechanical eating I'd been doing for months. My mom cooked. She didn't ask me a lot of questions. She just made sure there was food on the table and that I was never alone if I didn't want to be. My best friend drove down on weekends. We watched bad television. We did not talk about Cord unless I brought it up, which sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't. She had known him for as long as I had. I think she was grieving too, in her own way, for a version of my life that we had both believed in. I had a follow-up with the toxicologist in January. My levels were dropping. Not quickly, but steadily. She said that was the expected trajectory given that I was no longer being exposed. She said some of the neurological symptoms might take time to fully resolve. She said the fact that I'd caught it when I did mattered. I asked her what would have happened if I hadn't. She paused for a moment and said, the trajectory wasn't good. I thought about the evening tea ritual. 6 months of it. Every night, the blue mug, the honey, the careful small gesture. I thought about how many times I had sat across from him while I drank it and felt grateful. I thought about the distance between what I'd believed and what had actually been happening, and how those two things had existed at the same time in the same kitchen, and I hadn't known. The thing about being gaslit by someone who is also actively hurting you is that the gaslighting is the part that's hardest to recover from. The legal situation, as painful as it was, had a shape. There were documents, timelines, a process with steps, but the psychological part didn't have steps. The part where I had to accept that someone I slept next to for 3 years had looked at me every day and made a choice, repeatedly, deliberately, and then handed me a mug with a small, kind smile and watched me drink it. That part didn't have steps. His mother, when she found out, she called my mom's house. Once. My mom answered. I don't know exactly what was said, but the call lasted less than 2 minutes. His mother did not call again. My own mother never once said I told you so. She never once said I saw something was off. She just drove up to Raleigh, packed my things, and made me omelets for 6 weeks straight until I could stand up straight in the morning again. That's who she is. The divorce was finalized in April, 8 months after I left. Under the terms, and my lawyer was very good, I want to say that again, Cord was responsible for repaying the $23,000 in full as part of the settlement. The joint account balance, the equity in the house, all of it. I walked away with more than I'd walked in with. Financially, though that framing always feels strange to me because what I'd lost wasn't financial. He was also facing separate criminal proceedings. I'm not going to speak to the details of that because my lawyer advised against it, and honestly because I don't want to give it more of my time than it has already taken. What I want to tell you is this. In March of that year, a few weeks before the divorce was finalized, I walked a 5K. It was a small local one, not a race exactly. More of a community thing. There were people with strollers and a very determined senior citizen with a walking stick who finished before me. My best friend walked it with me. It took us 48 minutes. When we crossed the finish line, she started crying, which made me cry, and we stood there on the sidewalk in the March cold, laughing at ourselves and crying anyway. 4 months earlier, I'd been drifting to the left in a parking lot, losing words mid-sentence, not able to tell if what was happening to my body was real or something I was imagining, and now I was walking in a straight line. I was finishing sentences. I was cold and laughing and alive and in the specific and particular way that only comes from having almost lost something, completely awake. I still live in Wilmington, not at my mom's. I found a place of my own, a 1-bedroom apartment about 3 miles from her house with a little balcony and a kitchen I actually like cooking in. I go to her for Sunday dinners most weeks. I am still seeing the toxicologist every 3 months. My levels have been in the normal range since September. The neurologist closed my case in the fall with the word resolved on the paperwork, which I have kept, because it is a very good word. My best friend got engaged last year. I am going to be her maid of honor. She asked me in person over dinner and slid a little card across the table that said obviously on it. I said obviously back. We both cried. We are, apparently, criers now. I'm fine with that. I don't drink chamomile tea anymore. I don't think I ever will again. That's a small thing to lose compared to everything else I could have lost, and most days I don't think about it at all. But sometimes, in the evening when I'm sitting on my balcony with a different kind of tea, peppermint, usually, from a plain white mug that belonged to nobody but me, I sit with it for a minute. I think about the version of me who didn't know, who was grateful, who thought that a warm drink handed over with a small smile meant something true. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't naive. She was a person who believed the people she loved were who they said they were, and that is not a character flaw. That is just what love requires, and it is also what makes it possible to lose so much. I'm 31 now. I live in a place where the light in the mornings comes through the kitchen window at exactly the right angle. I am healthy. I am still the person in my friend group who shows up with a casserole. My hands don't shake anymore. I handle things. I am fine in a crisis. That's still true. It was true through everything, and it is the one thing I was never wrong about. I used to think that what almost broke me was the poisoning. The physical part, the numb hands, the drifting walk, the words I kept losing mid-sentence. But sitting here now, on my balcony in Wilmington with a cup of peppermint tea in a mug that belongs only to me, I know that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was the gap between what I believed and what was actually true, and how long I lived inside that gap without knowing. Cord didn't succeed. Not because he wasn't careful and not because someone swooped in to rescue me. He didn't succeed because I kept a journal when my memory started slipping, because I went back to the doctor a second time and a third, because my mom asked one quiet, strange question about a mug and then acted on her instinct before I even understood why she was asking. The outcome of this story wasn't luck. It was a series of small choices made by people who refused to stop paying attention. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Paying attention to your own body when it tells you something is wrong, even when the people around you say it isn't. To the small inconsistencies that don't quite add up, even when you want to believe they do. To the people in your life who show up, not with speeches, but with a casserole dish and a willingness to pack boxes on a Thursday afternoon without asking for an explanation. I think about the version of me who almost talked herself out of the third doctor's appointment, who almost accepted, "You're probably just dehydrated," as the final word. That version of me was not weak. She was tired and she was being deceived by someone she trusted completely, and she was doing her best with the information she had, but she kept going anyway. That's the part I'm most proud of. Not the divorce, not the settlement, not the word resolved on my neurologist's paperwork, though I love that word. I'm most proud that I kept showing up to appointments and writing in that journal and calling my mom, even when I didn't fully understand why I needed to. There's a version of the story where I don't do those things, where I accept the smallest, most comfortable explanation and go back to drinking the tea. I know that version exists because I came close to it more than once. What I understand now is that your instincts and your attention are not small things. They are the actual mechanism by which people survive situations designed to make them doubt themselves. What Cord chose to do had consequences. Legal, financial, personal consequences that followed directly from his choices. Not as punishment from some external force, but as the natural result of the trail he left behind. Documents. Lab results. Timestamps in a journal I kept because I didn't trust my own memory. Every choice makes something more or less possible, and the choices he made a very specific set of things possible for my lawyer and the detective and the toxicologist who looked at my blood work and understood what she was seeing. I'm 31. My hands don't shake. My mom lives 3 miles away. My best friend is getting married, and I'm going to stand next to her and probably cry. Which is fine, because we are criers now, and I have decided that's a good thing. I handle things. I always have. I just know now, more clearly than I ever did before, exactly what that means.